I never thought the day would come when my own son would look at me with eyes so cold, so distant, that I felt like a stranger in his world. But life has a way of breaking you in places you didn't know could crack. Asterisk. Before we go any further, subscribe to the channel, like, share, comment, and press the bell icon so you get notified every time we post a new story. Asterisk. It started on a Thursday evening. The sun had just dipped behind the houses across the street, leaving streaks of gold in the sky that reminded me of summers long gone. I had baked his favorite chicken pie, the one I used to make when he came home from school, tired and hungry. I set the table neatly, candles flickering gently, as though the warmth of home could still bring us together. I called him earlier that day. His voice had been curt, rushed, as if I were a burden pressing into his schedule. But I held on to hope. A mother always does. I told myself he was busy. That stress made him sharp. He would come, he would eat, and things would feel normal again. When the doorbell rang, my heart leaped. I smoothed down my dress, forced a smile, and opened the door. There he was, my boy, my only child, standing taller than ever, his hair perfectly styled, his shirt crisp and expensive. Beside him, his wife stood clutching her purse, her lips pressed tightly, eyes filled with disdain I had grown used to. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside, but he didn't move. He stood there, looking at me, with an expression that sent chills through my chest. His voice was steady, too steady, as if he had practiced these words in front of a mirror. "Mom, you're not wanted here." The air fell silent. My ears rang as if the world had collapsed around me. I blinked, waiting for the punchline, waiting for him to smile and say it was a joke. But there was no smile. His eyes were firm, cold, unrelenting. His wife's lips curved into the faintest smirk. "What did you just say?" My voice trembled, weaker than I intended. "You're not wanted here," he repeated, each word slicing into me like glass. "We need our own life, our own space. You can't keep showing up, expecting things to be like they used to. We don't want you living with us. We don't even want you visiting like this anymore." The pie cooled behind me on the table. The candles flickered as if mocking the warmth I had tried to create. My chest tightened, a hollow ache spreading through my ribs. My son, the baby I carried in my arms, the boy whose scraped knees I kissed, whose nightmares I soothed, was banishing me from his life. His wife spoke then, her tone sharp as a blade. "It's better for everyone this way. We need boundaries. You've had your life, now let us have ours." Boundaries. That word hit me harder than any insult could, as though I were some intruder in my own family. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab his hand and remind him of who I was. I wanted to ask how he could erase years of love, sacrifice, and devotion with a single sentence. But I couldn't move. My throat closed. My hands shook out instead. I whispered, "I made your favorite dinner." He didn't flinch. He didn't even look past me. He just shook his head. "Mom, please, stop making this harder. We're done with these dinners, done with these visits. You need to understand you're not wanted here." The words echoed inside me, each repetition like a hammer on fragile glass. I felt something break then, not the kind of break that heals with time, but the kind that reshapes you forever. I nodded slowly, my body moving before my mind could catch up. "I see," I said softly. "I understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. How could a mother ever understand being cast out by her own child? I stepped back, letting the cool air of the night brush against my skin. My hands gripped the edge of the doorframe, steadying myself as though the earth beneath me had tilted. They turned, walking back to their car, their footsteps confident, certain, final. I stood frozen, watching the red glow of the taillights fade into the distance. My home was silent again, the pie untouched, the candles burning low. I walked back inside slowly, each step heavier than the last. I sat at the table, staring at the empty chairs across from me. My son's laughter used to fill this room. His shoes used to clutter the hallway. His voice used to call out "Mom" with warmth, with love. Now all I heard was silence. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the hollow ache deepen. Tears blurred my vision, dripping onto the tablecloth I had ironed earlier that day. My son had shut me out, but as the tears fell, something else stirred inside me, a quiet strength I didn't know I still had. His words had broken me, yes, but they also awakened something far stronger. If he thought I was unwanted, if he thought he could erase me from his life, as though I had never existed, then he had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just a mother who gave endlessly without question. I was a woman who had built, sacrificed, endured, and survived. I had given him everything: my time, my love, my sacrifices, and tonight, as he slammed the door on me, I realized something he never expected. I still had the power to decide, and that night, broken as I was, I began to form a decision that would change everything. A decision he would never see coming. A decision that would shake his world, just as he had shattered mine. The pie remained untouched on the table, growing colder by the minute. The candles burned down to stubs, and as the night deepened, so did my resolve. He said I wasn't wanted, but he was about to learn the cost of pushing away the very person who had given him everything. That night, in the silence of my empty home, I made the choice that would turn his words back on him, and when it was done, he would understand that a mother's decision can cut deeper than any rejection. The night dragged on like a punishment. Every tick of the clock reminded me of the words I had just heard. My son's voice replayed in my mind again and again. "Mom, you're not wanted here." I sat in the kitchen, the pie untouched, the candles burned down to nothing but hardened wax. My house felt colder than ever before. It wasn't just the absence of their footsteps, or the echo of the slammed car door. It was the emptiness inside me, the kind of emptiness you can feel in your bones. I thought of every sleepless night I had spent worrying about him when he was little, the times I skipped meals so he could eat more, the clothes I patched and repatched to make sure he never felt less than the other children, the years I worked double shifts, exhausting myself so he could go to a better school. Every sacrifice I had made suddenly seemed invisible. I wiped my tears and stood up. My body felt weak, but something inside me had hardened. I walked to the small cabinet in the living room where I kept old albums. I pulled out the first one, dust rising into the air, and opened it. There he was, a baby swaddled in a blanket, his tiny fists clenched, his eyes closed, his mouth curved as if he were dreaming of warmth. I touched the photo gently, my finger tracing the outline of his face. That was the boy who had once needed me for everything, the boy who clung to me when thunder scared him, the boy who ran into my arms after his first day of school. Thought page after page, memory after memory, the weight of love pressed against my chest. And then I heard his words again, slicing through me. "You're not wanted." I closed the album with a sharp snap. My breath shook, my hands trembling, but my mind was no longer clouded. I realized then that if he could throw me away so easily, I had to let go of something I had been holding on to too tightly. I wasn't just his mother. I was a woman who had built a life from nothing. Everything I had, the house, the savings, the investments, was because of my hard work and sacrifices. And what had he given me in return? Rejection, disrespect, exile. I walked into my study and pulled open the drawer where my documents were kept. Deeds, bank records, my will. Yes, my will. That piece of paper that had his name written across it in bold, declaring him the sole heir to everything I owned. I stared at it for a long time, my fingers tightening on the edge. That paper was my final gift to him, my silent promise that even when I was gone, I would take care of him. But as I held it, his words thundered in my head. "You're not wanted here. Then why should I leave him everything? Why should my sacrifices continue to feed the very man who cast me aside like an old coat?" The thought startled me at first. A mother's instinct is to give, no matter what, to provide, even when unappreciated. But as I stood there, my chest tight and my heart raw, I understood something new. There comes a moment when love must stop being blind, when giving must be replaced with protecting yourself. That night, I sat at my desk, pen in hand, the will spread before me. My tears blurred the ink as I began to cross out his name. With every stroke of the pen, I felt my strength return. It was painful, yes, but it was also freeing. I replaced his name with something else. I decided that my inheritance would go to those who actually needed it: charities, foundations, children who had no one to fight for them. If my son thought I was unwanted, then he would no longer want what I had either. The silence of the house seemed to shift, no longer heavy. It felt alive with a strange new power. My decision was firm, and though it shattered me to admit it, it was the only way forward. As I signed my name at the bottom of the new draft, a strange calm washed over me. It was as if I had finally taken control of a life that had spun beyond my reach. For years, I had lived for him, sacrificed for him, given him everything. That night, for the first time in decades, I chose myself. For the first time in decades, I chose myself. But my decision didn't end with a pen stroke. No, it was only the beginning. because when a mother makes such a choice, it is not only about money, it is about drawing a line in the sand. It is about sending a message that some wounds cannot be ignored. I knew he would never expect it. He thought he had the upper hand, that he could speak to me as if I were nothing, and I would keep coming back, desperate for crumbs of affection. He thought I would always be there, waiting at the door with his favorite meal. But he had forgotten something vital. A mother's love is deep, but her strength runs deeper. I sat back in my chair, the papers neatly stacked, my heart pounding in my chest. Outside, the world was quiet, the moon casting silver light across the street. I imagined him, in his home, satisfied that he had pushed me away, thinking he had drawn his boundaries and secured his future. He had no idea that his future had just changed forever. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered into the stillness of the night. You said I wasn't wanted, so now, neither is my inheritance. The words didn't erase the pain, but they gave me a strange kind of strength, and with that strength, I knew the days ahead would be different. He would learn, one way or another, that actions have consequences. This was no longer just about being a mother. This was about being a woman who refused to be erased. And that night, my decision was sealed. When the sun rose the next morning, its light spilled across my living room in sharp golden beams. It should have been a comforting sight, but instead it felt cruel. The world was moving forward as if nothing had happened. While I sat in the ruins of everything I had believed about my family, I had barely slept. My eyes were swollen, my head heavy. Yet even through the haze of exhaustion, the memory of his words burned fresh. Mom, you're not wanted here. They struck me again and again. Like waves against a crumbling shore, I shuffled into the kitchen and stared at the cold pie still sitting on the counter. It looked almost tragic, like a symbol of hope that had been rejected before it even had a chance. I picked it up, carried it to the trash, and dropped it in. The hollow thud it made echoed through the room. For a moment, I leaned against the counter, trying to steady my breath. My son had not only rejected dinner, he had rejected me. Every bite of that pie had been made with love, but he had left it to rot, just as he had left me to rot in my own silence. But I reminded myself of the decision I had made the night before. My will was rewritten, his name erased, the inheritance redirected. For the first time in years, I had chosen myself. That thought gave me a flicker of strength. Still, a storm raged inside me. How could he do this? What had poisoned him so completely against me? I thought of his wife's face, the satisfaction in her smirk when he spoke those words. Had she whispered in his ear until my presence became unbearable to him? Or had he always harbored this resentment, waiting for the moment to set it free? I brewed myself a cup of tea, hands trembling as I poured. Sitting at the table, I stared at the steam rising from the mug. My reflection wavered in the liquid. An older woman with tired eyes, hair streaked with gray, lines of years etched across her face. I hardly recognized myself. Yet behind those weary eyes was a woman who had survived worse than heartbreak. I thought of the early years, the struggles to keep a roof over our heads. I thought of how I had worked through illness, pain, and exhaustion, just to make sure he had everything he needed. I thought of the nights I sat by his bedside, holding his fevered hand, praying for him to heal. Did all that mean nothing to him now? I sipped the tea slowly, the warmth spreading through me, and realized something. If he could erase me from his life so quickly, then perhaps it was time I erased him from mine, at least in the way he expected to benefit. It was not spite that guided my decision, it was justice. A mother's love is endless, but it is not blind, and mine had been trampled on enough. After breakfast, I gathered the papers from the night before. My new will sat neatly on the desk, ready for finalization, but I knew words on paper were not enough. If I wanted this to stand, if I wanted my decision to be irreversible, I had to take it to my lawyer. So I dressed carefully, choosing a plain navy dress, polished shoes, and the old pearl earrings my mother had left me. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I saw not just a mother, but a woman determined to protect her dignity. The walk to the lawyer's office felt longer than usual. Every step carried the weight of years of memories. I passed the park where I used to bring him as a child, pushing him on the swings until he laughed so hard he could barely breathe. I passed the bakery where he begged for chocolate pastries on Sunday mornings. Each place whispered reminders of who he once was who I once was to him. But I kept walking, steady and firm. Inside the office, the air smelled faintly of leather and polish. My lawyer, Mr. Daniels, greeted me with his usual calm professionalism. He was an older man, gray-haired and steady, with a voice that carried both authority and compassion. "Good morning," he said as I sat down. "You look troubled." I didn't waste time. I handed him the papers. "I need to make changes to my will, effective immediately." He adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. His brows lifted slightly, but he asked no unnecessary questions. "Are you certain about this?" I nodded firmly. "Completely certain." He studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod of understanding. "Very well. We'll make it official today." As he typed, I felt a strange mixture of grief and empowerment. Every click of the keys was a reminder that I was closing a chapter, one I had never imagined would end this way. When the documents were finalized, I signed my name with a steady hand. My decision was now legal, binding, permanent. Mr. Daniels placed the papers neatly in a folder. "You've done something difficult today, but sometimes difficult things are the right ones." I thanked him and left the office. The sky outside was overcast, clouds gathering, as if reflecting the heaviness of my heart. Yet there was also a faint light breaking through, a reminder that even storms pass. On the way home, I stopped at a small cafe. I sat by the window, watching the world go by, and allowed myself to breathe. For the first time in years, I was not thinking of what my son needed, or what would make him happy. I was thinking of me. The tea arrived, warm and fragrant. I wrapped my hands around the cup and let the heat seep into my skin. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a future without his shadow looming over me, a future where my choices were my own, where my sacrifices would no longer be taken for granted. But even as I sat there, a question gnawed at me. How long before he found out? How long before he realized that his mother, the woman he thought he could discard, had made a decision that would shake his life to the core? I sipped my tea, my heart beating faster at the thought, because when he did find out, the balance of power would shift. He had wounded me deeply, but he had underestimated me even more. The morning had begun in sorrow, but as the hours passed, it ended with something else entirely: resolve, strength, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, I had more control over my destiny than I had ever allowed myself to believe. As I walked home, the clouds parted slightly, letting a ray of sunlight fall across the street. I paused, lifted my face to the light, and whispered to myself, "I am not unwanted, not anymore." I carried those words with me into the afternoon, knowing they were only the beginning of what was to come, because soon my son would learn the truth, and when he did, it would not just break his pride. It would break the illusion that he could control me, silence me, or erase me from his world. And that was a lesson he would never forget. Days passed in heavy silence. My home had always been filled with memories of laughter, arguments, meals shared, and the daily rhythm of life. Now it was an empty shell. I woke each morning with the echo of my son's rejection still lodged in my chest, and though I tried to carry on, every corner of the house whispered reminders. I thought my decision about the will would bring peace. In some ways, it did. Knowing that he would not benefit from the sacrifices he so easily dismissed gave me strength. Yet the wound was still raw, and no matter how many cups of tea I sipped or how many books I tried to read, the hurt gnawed at me. One evening, as I folded laundry in the living room, the sound of a car pulling up startled me. My hands froze on a towel. I peeked through the window. It was him, my son. My breath caught in my throat. He climbed out of his car slowly, his movements uncertain, as though he were carrying a weight on his shoulders. He stood by the door for a long moment before knocking. I wanted to pretend I was not home. I wanted to ignore him, let him feel the sting of being unwanted for once. But a mother's instinct is complicated. Even after everything, I could not deny him. I opened the door cautiously. His eyes met mine, and for the first time in a long time, I saw hesitation there. No arrogance, no coldness, just unease. Mom, he said quietly. I gripped the door frame. What do you want? My voice was firm, but my hands trembled. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing away. Can I come in? I almost said no. The words burned on the tip of my tongue, but I stepped aside, and he entered, his presence filling the house that had been so empty. His presence filling the house that had been so empty. The silence between us was thick as he looked around the living room, his eyes lingering on the photographs lining the shelves. Pictures of him as a child, pictures of us together, moments frozen in time when love had been unquestionable. Why are you here? I asked, crossing my arms. He swallowed hard. I wanted to talk. My voice cracked with bitterness. After telling me I am not wanted, after slamming the door on me as though I were nothing, his face tightened with guilt. He sat on the edge of the sofa, his hands clasped tightly together. I should not have said it like that. I laughed, sharp and humorless. Like that? You think the problem was in the way you said it, not in the fact that you said it at all. He lowered his head. Things have been tense. She feels like you're too involved in our lives. She wanted space. I thought it was the right thing. I felt anger rise in me. So her feelings mattered, but mine did not. You threw me aside to keep her happy. His silence was answer enough. I walked to the table, resting my hands on its surface to steady myself. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. Do you know what it feels like to be told by your own child that you are not wanted? To stand at the door of the home you built with love and hear your son reject you, as if you were a stranger? He looked up, pain in his eyes. I regret it. I do. But regret was not enough. Regret could not erase the memory of that night or the decision I had made since then. I studied him carefully, noting the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes avoided mine. Something was wrong, something more than guilt. What is it you really want? I asked. He hesitated, then finally spoke. We're having some financial difficulties. The business isn't going well. There are debts. I thought maybe you could help. The words cut through me, sharper than his rejection. So that was it. He had not come to apologize out of love or remorse. He had come because he needed something. I stared at him, my heart hardening with each second. You told me I was not wanted, and now you come asking for money. His face flushed. It's not like that. It is exactly like that, I interrupted. My voice was stronger now, fueled by anger. You rejected me, humiliated me, made me feel like nothing, and the moment your comfortable life begins to crumble, you come running back. Not for me, not for love, but for what I have. He stood abruptly, his voice rising. I am still your son. You should want to help me. I stared at him, my chest aching with disbelief. A son does not tell his mother she is unwanted. A son does not cast her aside and then return only when he needs her. If you wanted my help, you should have thought of that before you broke me. For a moment, we stood in silence, the weight of my words filling the room. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, but beneath his anger, I saw something else. Desperation. I knew then that he was not here out of choice. He was here because he had no other option, and that truth stung more than anything. You should leave, I said quietly. He looked at me in shock. Mom, leave, I repeated, firmer this time. I will not be used. Not anymore. His face twisted with frustration. You'll regret this. I met his gaze steadily. No. I already regret giving you everything without teaching you gratitude. He stormed toward the door, yanking it open. For a brief moment, he paused, as if waiting for me to stop him, but I did not move. I stood tall, my hands steady at my sides, when the door slammed shut behind him. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My knees trembled, and I sank into a chair, my heart pounding. The house was silent again. But this time, the silence was different. It was not heavy with sorrow. It was filled with clarity. He had returned, not for me, but for what I had. And I had denied him. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, yet it was also the most liberating. For once, I had not let his needs overshadow my worth. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since that night, I felt a flicker of peace. But I knew this was not the end. His desperation would not let him stay away for long. And when he came back, it would not just be for help, it would be for survival. And I was ready, because now he knew I could say no. Asterisk. The days that followed my decision were not peaceful. I thought removing myself from the turmoil would bring me a measure of calm. But instead, it felt like I was carrying a storm inside me. The words my son had said rang in my ears every time I closed my eyes. You're not wanted here. It was like a curse that had seeped into the walls of my home. No matter where I turned, I could hear his voice, sharp and unforgiving, cutting into me like a knife. I tried distracting myself. I baked bread like I used to when he was a boy, kneading the dough until my arms ached. But even the smell of it brought memories I wished I could forget. I tended the garden, clipping away the dead branches and pulling weeds, but the silence of the earth offered no comfort. My life felt suspended in air, as if I had no ground to stand on anymore. One evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, I received a phone call. I recognized the number instantly. My son. For a moment, I stared at the screen, paralyzed. My heart thudded violently in my chest, and my hands trembled as though holding the phone burned me. I could have ignored it. I could have let it ring until it died into silence, but a force stronger than my pride compelled me to answer. His voice was tight, strained, not quite angry, but certainly not warm. "Mom, we need to talk." I almost laughed at the hypocrisy of it. After stripping me of my place in his home, after tearing my heart open with rejection, suddenly he needed to talk. "Still," I answered softly, "what is it you want?" He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt the weight of years between us. Finally, he said, "It's about the will. I heard from someone that you made changes." The words struck me cold. I had not told him. No one but the lawyer knew. How did he find out? My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I considered lying, denying it all. But I had lived too long to fear the truth. "Yes," I said firmly. "I did. I made changes." There was silence on the other end, and then his voice rose, anger barely contained. "How could you do that to me? After everything I've done for this family, you go behind my back and cut me out." My voice shook, not from weakness but from years of swallowed pain finally spilling over. "You told me I wasn't wanted, that I had no place in your life. What reason would I have to keep rewarding that kind of cruelty?" He let out a harsh breath, and I could almost see his face twisted in frustration. "You're overreacting. It was just an argument. Families fight, but they don't destroy each other over words said in anger." Something inside me broke. My hands clenched around the phone as I fought to keep my voice steady. "Do you even hear yourself? Words are not just sounds in the air. They carry weight. They wound. You said them to me, your mother, the one who carried you, raised you, sacrificed for you. You said I was not wanted. Do you have any idea what that means to someone like me? That kind of wound does not heal with excuses." He was quiet then. For the first time, I thought I heard something crack in his tone, like a fissure opening. "I didn't mean it like that," he said finally, but the words sounded thin, like paper against fire. I closed my eyes and took a breath. "But you did, and even if you regret it now, the damage is done. Actions follow words. You wanted me gone, so I made myself gone, and I will not leave my legacy in the hands of someone who cannot even see my worth." There was another silence, heavier this time. Then he said coldly, "If you go through with this, don't expect me to come back. Don't expect me to forgive you." Tears burned my eyes, but my voice was steel when I replied, "I never expected forgiveness from someone who cannot see the pain they caused. I am done begging for a place in your life." I ended the call before he could speak again. My hands were shaking, but I felt a strange relief, as if closing that conversation had sealed a chapter I should have finished long ago. The next day, I woke up with a determination I had not felt in months. I put on a coat and walked to the lawyer's office. My head held high. The paperwork was ready, waiting for my signature. My hand did not waver as I wrote my name across the pages that finalized my decision. My son was officially removed from my will. Asterisk. The lawyer looked at me with a cautious kindness. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. I met his gaze firmly, more certain than I have ever been about anything. He closed the door on me. "I am only making sure it stays shut." As I walked home, the autumn wind whipped around me, but I felt lighter than I had in weeks. The burden of indecision had finally lifted. Still, I knew this was not the end. My son was not the type to let go quietly. His pride was a roaring fire, and I had just poured oil onto the flames. Sure enough, that evening there was a knock at my door. I froze, every muscle tensing. I opened it slowly, and there he was, standing with eyes blazing, his jaw tight, fists clenched at his sides. "You really did it," he said, his voice shaking with fury. "Yes," I answered, my tone calm, even though my heart was racing. Asterisk. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for something, anything to anchor him. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You've humiliated me. You've destroyed the future I worked for. You've humiliated me. You've destroyed the future I worked for." My anger flared, but it came from a place of deep sadness. "Destroyed your future? What about mine? Did you think about the years I poured into raising you, giving you everything I had, only to be told I was not wanted? You talk about humiliation. But what about the humiliation you made me live through?" He took a step closer, his face twisted in rage. "I am your son. You owe me." I met his gaze without flinching. "I owe you nothing but the truth, and the truth is that respect is earned, not owed. You forgot that when you cast me aside. Now I am only giving you what you gave me." For a moment, I thought he would explode, that his anger would spill into something violent, but instead he froze. His jaw worked, his fists unclenched slowly, and I saw something flicker in his eyes: fear, confusion, maybe even regret. He turned without another word and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there in the silence that followed, my chest heaving, my hands trembling, but beneath the shaking, I felt strength. For once, I had not bent under the weight of his words. For once, I had stood tall, not as his mother, but as a woman who deserved respect. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, staring into the steam. I thought about the years I had lost, the sacrifices I had made, the love I had given freely, only to be repaid with rejection. And for the first time in a long while, I thought about myself, about what I deserved, about the kind of life I could still have, even without him. I did not know what tomorrow would bring. I did not know if he would come back, if he would ever realize the depth of what he had done. But I knew this much: I would no longer be at the mercy of his words. My story was not over, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was the one holding the pen. Asterisk, the morning after my son stormed out of my house, I woke to an unfamiliar stillness. It was not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that presses against your chest until you struggle to breathe. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat by the window, staring at the street outside, half expecting his car to pull up again. It did not. At first, I convinced myself that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed, that he had gone home, calmed down, and realized the cruelty of his words. But by noon, my phone began to ring, not with his voice, but with the voices of others. The first was my sister, her tone tight with judgment. "What on earth did you do?" she demanded. I frowned, clutching the phone tighter. "What do you mean? Your son called me this morning. He said you disinherited him. He was furious, said you had betrayed him. Do you know what this looks like to the family?" I closed my eyes, the weight of her words settling heavy on my shoulders. "It looks like the truth. I changed my will because of how he treated me. It is my decision." Her sigh was sharp, full of disappointment. "Decisions have consequences. You could have kept this quiet, resolved it within the family. Now everyone is going to hear about it." She hung up before I could answer. I sat there in stunned silence, the phone still pressed to my ear, realizing the extent of what my son had done. He was not just angry. He was mobilizing others, spreading his version of the story, painting me as the villain. The calls kept coming. A cousin, asking if I had lost my mind. A neighbor who had somehow caught wind of the argument. Even an old friend from church left a message on my answering machine, her voice dripping with pity. Each word was another stone on my back, crushing me under the weight of shame that was not mine to carry. By evening, I felt like I was drowning. My son's anger had not stopped at my doorstep. It had seeped into the community, poisoning the air I breathed. I sat in my kitchen, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped below the horizon, and I wondered if I had made a mistake. Had I been too harsh? Had I allowed my pain to blind me? But then I remembered the look in his eyes, the venom in his voice when he said, "You're not wanted here." I remembered the years of sacrifice, the countless times I had put his needs before my own, and I remembered how quickly he had turned my private decision into public humiliation. No, I thought firmly, this was not my shame. This was his. Still, the pressure was suffocating. I knew I could not sit in silence while he destroyed my reputation. I had to confront him again, not for reconciliation, but for truth. The next day, I drove to his house. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The closer I got, the heavier my chest felt, as though my heart knew I was walking into battle. When I pulled into his driveway, I saw his wife standing at the door. Her face was pale, her eyes wary. She did not greet me, did not invite me in. She simply said, "He's inside," and stepped aside as though she wanted no part in what was about to unfold. I walked into the living room, and there he was, pacing like a caged animal. The moment he saw me, his face twisted into a sneer. "You finally came," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. I stood tall, refusing to let his anger shrink me. "I came because I will not let you destroy me with lies. You are telling people I betrayed you, that I disowned you out of spite. But you know the truth. You told me I was not wanted. You made your choice long before I made mine." He laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the air. "You think anyone cares about your side of the story? You think they'll believe you over me? I am their blood, their future. You are just an old woman clinging to the past." The words sliced through me, but I did not falter. "If I am just an old woman, then why does my decision shake you so deeply? Why do you care so much about the inheritance of someone you claim has no place in your life?" His face darkened, and he stepped closer until he was inches from me. "Because it's mine. Everything you have is because of me. Because I was the reason you worked, the reason you sacrificed. You owe me for that." I stared at him, stunned by the depth of his entitlement. I owe you nothing but the truth. And the truth is, you cannot claim what you never respected. You cannot inherit what you tried to cast aside. For a moment, I saw flicker in his eyes something raw, something broken, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by rage. If you do this, if you cut me out for good, I will never forgive you. You will die alone, and no one will mourn you. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out, each one steady, each one final. Better to die alone with dignity than live surrounded by those who see me as nothing but a wallet. I will not bend, not this time. He opened his mouth to speak again, but his wife entered the room, her voice trembling. Enough, she said, her eyes darting between us. This has gone too far. You cannot keep tearing each other apart like this. But neither of us moved. We stood locked in a battle that had been years in the making. Our words, weapons, our silence armor. Finally, I turned and walked toward the door. At the threshold, I paused and looked back at him one last time. You broke me once with your words, but you will not break me again. Whatever future you thought you had with my legacy is gone. You will have to build your own, just as I did. I stepped out into the cold evening air, my heart pounding but my spine unbending. Behind me, I heard the sound of something shattering, maybe a glass thrown against the wall, maybe something deeper breaking inside him. I did not look back. As I drove away, the tears finally came, hot and relentless, but beneath them was a fierce resolve. My son could spread lies, he could twist the story, he could try to turn the world against me, but I would not yield. For the first time in my life, I was fighting not for him, not for family, but for myself. When I reached home, I sat in the darkness of my living room, the silence pressing around me. I thought about the years I had wasted begging for his approval, for his love, and I realized something with startling clarity. Sometimes, the most painful freedom is also the most necessary. I had lost a son, but I had found myself, and though the road ahead would be lonely, it would also be honest. No more pretending, no more pleading, just me, standing tall in the truth I had claimed for myself. I thought the confrontation at his house would mark the peak of our conflict. I believed that walking away from him, telling him to his face that I would not bend, would close the chapter once and for all. But I was wrong. That moment was not an ending. It was only the beginning of something darker, something I had not anticipated. For a few days, the silence returned. No phone calls, no knocks at the door, no whispers from neighbors. I almost let myself believe that perhaps he had finally accepted my decision, that perhaps he had realized the futility of continuing this war. But silence, I soon learned, was not peace. It was preparation. The first sign came in the form of a letter slipped under my door. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting was unmistakable. My hands trembled as I opened it, my heart pounding as though bracing for impact. The words inside were short, cruel, and final. If you think you can erase me from your life, then I will erase you from mine. Do not expect me to call, to visit, to care. From this day forward, you are no mother of mine. The paper slipped from my hands, drifting to the floor like ash. I sank into a chair, my breath ragged, my body trembling. I had prepared myself for anger, for shouting, for threats, but not for this. Not for the cold severing of the bond that had defined my existence for decades. To be told by the very child I had carried, nurtured, and loved beyond measure that I was no longer his mother. It was a blow I had not seen coming. It was a blow I had not seen coming. The days that followed were a blur. I moved through the motions of living, but everything felt hollow. I cooked meals I could not taste, folded laundry with hands that shook, sat in front of the television without seeing a thing. The letter lay on my kitchen table, its words seared into my memory. Every time I passed by it, I felt the wound reopen, raw and bleeding. Yet, even in the depths of that pain, a small voice whispered within me, he cannot erase what is true. I am his mother, no matter what words he writes on a page. He can deny me, reject me, abandon me, but he cannot change the blood that binds us. Still, I felt something inside me break, a fracture that could not be mended. The bond between us had not just been stranded, had been shattered. It was not long before the consequences of his letter began to ripple through my life. Friends who once greeted me warmly at church now avoided my gaze, their whispers following me as I walked past. Relatives who used to call on holidays now sent clipped messages, their loyalty clearly swayed by his narrative. He had not only disowned me, but had painted me as the villain in his story. And people believed him. One afternoon, as I was returning from the market, I overheard two women speaking near the church steps. They did not notice me as I approached, and their words cut deep. Did you hear what she did to her son? Cut him out of everything. Imagine treating your own flesh and blood like that. The other shook her head, her voice dripping with disapproval. It is no wonder he wants nothing to do with her. A mother who abandons her child for money is no mother at all. I froze, the bags of groceries digging into my hands, their weight suddenly unbearable. I wanted to scream, to tell them they had it all wrong, that I was the one abandoned, the one cast aside, but my voice failed me, choked back by the realization that no explanation would matter. He had poisoned the well, and I was left to drink from it alone. That night, as I sat in my empty living room, the darkness pressing in, I felt the enormity of what had happened. My son had not only rejected me but had taken from me the very foundation of my identity. To the world, I was now a mother who had failed, a woman who had chosen revenge over love. The tears came then, not soft or quiet but fierce and unrelenting. I cried for the child I had raised, for the boy who used to run to me with scraped knees and tear-streaked cheeks, seeking comfort in my arms. I cried for the years I had poured into him, the sacrifices I had made, the dreams I had carried for his future, and I cried for myself, for the woman I had become, stripped of dignity by the very person I had loved most. But as the tears subsided, something else rose within me, a burning anger, not the destructive kind that consumed, but the steady flame of resolve. He had struck me with his cruelest words, tried to erase me, to reduce me to nothing. But I was not nothing. I was more than his mother. I was a woman who had endured storms before, and I would endure this one too. The next morning, I gathered every photograph, every memento of him that lay scattered through my house. I placed them carefully in a box, each item a fragment of a life that no longer belonged to me. The baby shoes, the graduation cap, the framed picture of him smiling on his wedding day, all of it went into the box. My hands shook as I taped it shut, but my heart felt strangely steady. I carried the box to the attic, tucked it into a corner, and closed the door. It was not an act of erasure but of survival. If he wanted to pretend I no longer existed, then I would protect myself by doing the same. In the days that followed, I began to reclaim pieces of myself I had long abandoned. I joined a book club at the library, surrounded by women who did not know my story and did not care to judge me for it. I started volunteering at the community center, helping children with their homework, finding in their laughter a balm for my wounds. I even signed up for a painting class, my brushstrokes tentative at first but growing bolder with each canvas. For the first time in years, I was living for myself, not through the lens of my son's approval. And though the ache in my chest remained, it no longer defined me. But just when I thought I had found a fragile balance, the phone rang one evening. The number was unfamiliar, but something in me compelled me to answer. "Is this Mrs. Carter?" a man's voice asked. Yes, it is, I replied cautiously. "This is Attorney Simmons. I represent your son. He has filed a legal challenge against the changes in your will. He intends to contest your decision in court." The words hit me like a blow to the stomach. My knees buckled, and I sank into a chair, clutching the phone as though it might anchor me. A court battle. He was not content with disowning me, with turning family and friends against me. He wanted to drag me through the public humiliation of a legal fight, to strip from me even the right to decide what would happen to my own life's work. As I hung up the phone, my hands trembling, I realized the truth with painful clarity. The shattering blow was not the letter he had written, not the words that had cut me to the core. It was his relentless determination to destroy me, to claim control even when he had declared me no mother of his daughter. And yet, as fear clawed at my chest, another feeling rose to meet it: defiance. He thought he could break me in court as he had tried to break me at home. But he had underestimated me. I had endured too much, survived too much, to surrender now. The battle lines had been drawn, and for the first time, I was ready to fight, not as his mother, but as myself. That's asterisk. The day the court summons arrived, the weight of it felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. I sat at my kitchen table, the envelope torn open before me, my eyes tracing the official language that confirmed my worst fears. My son was suing me. Not only had he rejected me as his mother, but now he was attempting to strip me of the very right to decide what would happen to the legacy I had built with my own hands. The courtroom became the new battlefield. Each night before the hearing, I rehearsed the story of my life in my mind. The sacrifices, the long nights of working double shifts to keep food on the table, the small victories of raising him alone, after his father had passed. Every memory became a weapon I hoped would shield me from his assault. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully, a navy suit, modest but firm, with a silver brooch my mother had given me years ago. It was a symbol of strength, of women who had endured far worse than legal battles. As I stood in front of the mirror, I told myself, you are not just his mother today, you are your own defender. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and tension. I walked through the echoing halls, my heels clicking against the marble floors, each step steady, though my heart thudded violently in my chest. When I entered the courtroom, I saw him, my son. He was seated at the plaintiff's table, his posture straight, his suit crisp, his face cold. There was no recognition in his eyes, no flicker of warmth, no memory of who I had been to him. His attorney, Simmons, stood tall and confident, his presence commanding the room. On my side sat Miss Howard, a kind but sharp lawyer recommended by a friend from church. She placed a reassuring hand on mine and whispered, "Stay calm, we fight with truth." When the judge entered, all rose. My breath caught in my throat as the proceedings began. Simmons wasted no time painting me as the villain. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, his delivery precise. "This case is about a mother who has abandoned her duties, who has used her resources as a weapon against her own son. My client, a devoted and caring individual, has been unjustly cut from a will he was promised since childhood. This is not about greed, but about justice, about honoring the bond between parent and child that she has recklessly severed." Each word felt like a dagger. He spoke of promises I had never made, twisting kindnesses into obligations, transforming years of sacrifice into accusations of manipulation. My son sat beside him, nodding, his expression carved in stone. When it was Ms. Howard's turn, her tone was steady, respectful, but firm. "Your Honor, this case is not about justice. It is about entitlement. The plaintiff, a grown man, has chosen to reject his mother publicly and privately, going so far as to declare in writing that she is no longer his family. He cannot both disown her and demand her legacy. The law is clear. A person has the right to determine what happens to their estate, and the defendant's choice was not made lightly. It was made after enduring cruelty, manipulation, and abandonment. Asterisk. For the first time, I saw the judge's eyes flicker with interest. Still, the battle had only begun. Witnesses were called. My sister, his aunt, took the stand. She spoke carefully, torn between love for me and pity for him. "She has always been a devoted mother," she said softly, glancing at me with a small smile. "But I have seen how strained things have become. There were arguments, harsh words. I cannot deny that." The courtroom hummed with whispers. Simmons seized on it instantly. "So you admit, Mrs. Harper, that there was conflict, that the defendant was harsh toward her son?" She hesitated, looking at me, guilt written across her face. "Yes, but she acted out of pain, not malice. Still, the damage was done." My son looked at me, triumphant, as if her words had justified everything he had done. Asterisk. Then, it was my turn to take the stand. I walked slowly to the witness chair, my legs trembling, my palms damp. I swore the oath, my voice barely steady, and sat down facing the judge. Ms. Howard approached. "Mrs. Carter, can you tell the court, in your own words, why you chose to change your will?" "Own words, why you chose to change your will." I took a deep breath, forcing the tears back. "Because my son told me I was no longer his mother. Because he looked me in the eyes and said I was not wanted in his life." Those words broke me. I had spent decades giving everything I had to him, sacrificing my own needs, my own dreams, to ensure his, and in return, he cast me aside. I realized then that my legacy should not go to someone who despises me, but to causes and people who might honor it. The courtroom was silent, the weight of my words pressing down on every ear. Simmons rose quickly, pacing like a predator. "Mrs. Carter, is it not true that your son supported you financially at times, that he helped with expenses when you struggled?" "Yes," I admitted, "but not as an obligation. As a kindness, the same kindness I showed him throughout his life." "And is it not true that you have, on multiple occasions, threatened to cut him out of your life if he did not meet your expectations?" I shook my head firmly. "I never threatened him. I begged him to respect me. There is a difference." Simmons leaned closer, his tone sharp. "Or perhaps, Mrs. Carter, this is less about respect and more about control. Perhaps this is your way of punishing him for living his own life." My voice cracked, but I held steady. "If asking for respect is control, then I am guilty. But I will not apologize for wanting dignity from my own child." The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. As the day wore on, fatigue seeped into my bones. Every testimony, every cross-examination, chipped away at me. By the time the gavel struck, signaling adjournment, I felt hollow. Yet beneath the exhaustion, a spark of resolve remained. Outside the courthouse, the press had gathered, their cameras flashing, their questions hurled like stones. "Mrs. Carter, why would you disown your son? Do you regret your decision? Is this about money or revenge?" I said nothing, letting Ms. Howard guide me through the crowd. But inside, I burned with the injustice of it all. My truth was being twisted, my life turned into a spectacle. That night, alone in my bed, I replayed every moment of the hearing, the way my son had looked at me without recognition, the way Simmons had painted me as a monster, the way the whispers had followed me even outside the courtroom. Yet, amid the pain, I found clarity. This battle was not just about inheritance or money. It was about identity. It was about reclaiming the dignity my son had tried to strip from me. He wanted the world to believe I was nothing without him. I would prove that I was everything in spite of him. As dawn broke, casting pale light across my room, I made a vow. I would not retreat. I would not surrender. If he wanted a war in court, then I would give him one. Not out of vengeance, but out of survival. Because this was no longer just about him taking from me. It was about me refusing to let him define who I was. The next hearing was set for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks to prepare, to gather every document, every letter, every shred of proof that told the story of my life. 2 weeks to turn my pain into strength. 2 weeks to show the world that a mother may be broken, but she is never defeated. And as I looked in the mirror that morning, the reflection staring back at me was no longer just a grieving mother. It was a warrior, tempered by sorrow, but unshakable in resolve. The courtroom battle had begun, and I intended to finish it. The courthouse loomed larger the second time. The gray stone walls seemed colder, more unyielding, as though the building itself fed on the bitterness of those who entered it. I stood outside for a moment before stepping in, staring at the tall doors and reminding myself that fear would not serve me. My heart ached, my mind ran wild, but my feet held firm. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Lawyers gathered in corners, whispering strategies, their papers rustling like wings of restless birds. I found my seat beside Miss Howard, who was already rifling through folders, her sharp eyes scanning each document. She looked up at me briefly and offered a steady nod. "Today we strike back." When the judge entered, silence blanketed the room. His gavel echoed like thunder against the oak bench. "Court is now in session." Simmons rose first, his presence commanding. "Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced. My client has obtained letters written by the defendant that clearly demonstrate her intention to manipulate and guilt him for financial support. We submit these letters into record." The bailiff collected a stack of papers and delivered them to the judge. My chest tightened. I recognized the handwriting, my handwriting, but those letters were never meant for strangers' eyes. They were private, written in moments of desperation, when I had pleaded with my son to visit, to care, to remember that I still existed. Simmons pounced. In these letters, Mrs. Carter writes phrases such as, "If you truly loved me, you would not abandon me." She repeatedly ties financial contributions to emotional validation. This is manipulation, plain and simple. She used guilt as a leash. My son sat beside him, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a fire I no longer recognized. He nodded along, as if every word spoken confirmed what he had always believed. At Ms. Howard rose calmly, gathering her papers. "Your Honor, the defense requests that these letters be read in their entirety, not cherry-picked for selective phrases. Context matters. A mother reaching out in pain is not the same as coercion. These are words of longing, not contracts of obligation." The judge agreed, and the bailiff began reading aloud. That as my words filled the courtroom, I felt stripped bare. Every fear, every lonely night, every plea spilled into the open. I had written about sitting alone on birthdays, about hearing laughter from families on the street, while silence ruled my own home. I had written about memories of him as a child, holding my hand tightly, swearing he would never leave me. I had begged him to remember the bond we once shared. By the time the last letter was read, I could not lift my head. Shame and sorrow pressed down like lead. But then Miss Howard rose again, her voice strong. "Your Honor, what you have heard are not demands. They are not legal contracts. They are the words of a mother abandoned by her only child. If such words are considered manipulation, then grief itself would be a crime. The plaintiff would have you believe these letters prove entitlement. In truth, they prove love. Painful, desperate, human love. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker across the judge's face. Simmons shifted tactics. He called a witness. To my horror, it was my son's wife. She walked confidently to the stand, her designer dress crisp, her chin high. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore the oath, and sat down with the posture of someone who believed the world owed her its ear. Simmons asked gently, "Can you tell the court about your relationship with the defendant?" Her lips curled into a practiced frown. From the beginning, she resented me. She accused me of stealing her son. She refused to accept our marriage. She created division where there should have been unity. I shook my head silently, disbelief coursing through me. She was twisting everything. I had welcomed her at first. I had tried to be kind, but she had slowly drawn him away, drip by drip, until he no longer answered my calls. Asterisk, she continued, her voice dripping with rehearsed sorrow. She told me once that I would never be good enough, that I was a parasite. Those were her words. A parasite? Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My hands gripped the table so tightly my knuckles turned white. That conversation had never happened. I wanted to shout, to scream the truth, but Ms. Howard placed a hand on my arm, steadying me. When cross-examination began, Ms. Howard struck like a blade. "Mrs. Carter-in-law, do you have written proof of these claims?" She hesitated. "No, but I remember clearly." "Convenient," Ms. Howard replied smoothly. "Is it also convenient that since your marriage, your husband has ceased all visits to his mother, ceased all calls, ceased all gestures of care? Did you encourage this distance?" Her face tightened, but she forced a sweet smile. "Of course not. He made his own choices." Ms. Howard leaned closer. "And yet, you benefit directly from any inheritance he may receive. Is that correct?" "Yes, but no further questions," Ms. Howard cut in, her tone sharp enough to draw blood. The courtroom buzzed. For once, the mask of control slipped from my daughter-in-law's face. She returned to her seat beside my son, whispering furiously. He avoided her gaze, but his fists clenched. Then, it was my turn again. Ms. Howard guided me gently. "Mrs. Carter, can you tell the court about the day your son told you that you were no longer welcome in his life?" The memory flooded back with such force that tears burned my eyes. I swallowed hard. "He looked at me and said I was not wanted. He said I was no longer his mother." That moment shattered something inside me. I realized then that love, no matter how deep, cannot survive where it is rejected. That is why I changed my will, not to punish him, but to protect myself, to give what little I have left to something that might not hate me for existing. Asterisk silence followed. The judge's pen paused mid. Even Simmons did not rise immediately. Finally, he stood, his tone icy. "Mrs. Carter, is it possible that your memory of that day is colored by your emotions? That perhaps he never said those exact words?" I straightened, my voice steady. "I may be old, Mr. Simmons, but my memory is clear. When your own child tells you that you are no longer his mother, you do not forget the words. They carved themselves into your soul." The gavel struck lightly as the judge called for a recess. The tension broke like glass shattering. The tension broke like glass shattering. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, questions flew. I shielded my face and walked quickly with Ms. Howard. She led me to a quiet bench in the courtyard. For a long moment, we sat in silence. Finally, she spoke. "They are desperate, and desperation leads to mistakes. Your daughter-in-law's testimony will not sit well with the judge. It was too rehearsed, but we must be prepared. They may bring more." I nodded, though inside I felt like crumbling. He hates me enough to tear me apart in front of strangers. How did we reach this point? Ms. Howard's expression softened. "Pain often disguises itself as anger, but you cannot fight for his heart here. You can only fight for your dignity." Her words steadied me. When we returned, the judge announced the next hearing would be reserved for closing arguments and final evidence. The storm was nearing its end, but storms do not pass without damage. That night, I sat at my desk, staring at the photographs spread before me. My son as a baby, clutching my finger, his first day of school, smiling with missing teeth, his graduation, tall and proud, memories that no court could erase. I realized then that even if I won the case, I had already lost something far greater. Yet, within that loss, I found a strange strength. For the first time in years, I was no longer begging to be loved. I was demanding to be respected. The trial had stripped me bare, but in that nakedness, I discovered who I truly was. A mother, yes, but also a woman who had lived, sacrificed, endured, a woman who deserved more than silence and rejection. The truth had been twisted, my words weaponized, but still, I remained. And as I prepared for the final battle in the courtroom, I made another vow to myself. I would not let them rewrite my life. The day of the final. Hearing dawned with the sky heavy with clouds. Rain tapped against my window, a restless rhythm that mirrored the pounding of my heart. I dressed slowly, choosing a dark blue dress and my mother's old brooch, a small anchor that steadied me when the world felt too large. My hands trembled as I pinned it, but my eyes, when I looked in the mirror, were firm. Ms. Howard arrived promptly, her briefcase clutched like a weapon. "Today we finish this," she said simply. The courthouse felt different that morning, less crowded, yet heavier with expectation. The air inside seemed thicker, charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. Spectators whispered as we entered, their eyes darting between me and my son, who stood tall beside his wife. They looked like a pair of generals marching into battle, united in their cause to strip me of dignity. When the judge entered, the courtroom stilled. His gavel struck once. "We will now hear closing arguments." Simmons rose first, smooth as ever, his voice steady and confident. "Your Honor, this case is not about hatred. It is about fairness. My client, David Carter, has been subjected to years of emotional manipulation. His mother used guilt and despair as tools to control him. Now, faced with the loss of inheritance that he rightfully deserves as her only son, she has resorted to painting herself as the victim. But the evidence is clear. The letters, the testimonies, even her own words reveal a pattern of emotional coercion. We ask the court to nullify her revised will and restore what is legally and morally my client's." He sat down with a flourish, his eyes flicking briefly to mine, cold, satisfied, convinced he had already won. Ms. Howard rose slowly, her presence commanding without theatrics. She placed her hands on the table before her and faced the judge directly. "Your Honor, we have heard much about manipulation. We have heard selective quotes, twisted memories, and accusations dressed as truth. But let us not lose sight of the simplest fact. A will is not a contract between two parties. It is the final statement of a person's intent, their last voice in this world. And unless fraud or coercion is proven, it is sacred." She lifted the letters Simmons had introduced earlier and held them high. "These are the words of a grieving mother. Desperate. Yes, emotional, absolutely. But they are not conditions, not ultimatums, not bargains for inheritance. They are the cries of a heartbreaking. If that is manipulation, then every human who has ever begged to be loved would stand guilty." Her voice rose, strong, unwavering. "This is not a case about entitlement. It is a case about rejection. A mother was told she was no longer wanted. Her son severed their bond with words so cruel they left scars deeper than any wound. Faced with that truth, she made a choice, not to punish, but to preserve what dignity she had left. She chose to give her life's work to causes that would not spit on her love. That is not vindictive. That is survival." The room was silent, every eye fixed on her. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. Then Ms. Howard did something unexpected. She turned, not to the judge, but to my son, David. She said, her voice softer now, "Tell us, under oath, did your mother ever force you to promise her your inheritance? Did she ever hold it over your head like a weapon?" The judge frowned but allowed the question. My son stiffened, caught off guard. Simmons whispered urgently to him, but the judge raised a hand. "The witness will answer." My son hesitated, his eyes flicking to his wife, who stared at him with sharp intensity. He opened his mouth, closed it again, then finally muttered, "No, she never forced me." The words hung in the air, heavier than any gavel strike. Ms. Howard nodded. No further questions. The judge shuffled his papers, his face stern, contemplative. "This court has considered the arguments carefully. At its heart, the question is whether the defendant acted under malice or manipulation when altering her will. The evidence shows otherwise. The letters presented are personal and emotional, but they do not demonstrate coercion. The testimony of the daughter-in-law lacked corroboration and served her own interest. And most importantly, the plaintiff himself admitted that no force was applied. The silence was absolute. The judge continued, his voice steady. "Therefore, this court upholds the validity of Mrs. Carter's revised will. The plaintiff's request is denied." His gavel struck, final and unyielding. For a moment, I could not move. Relief washed through me so suddenly, it nearly knocked me from my seat. Tears blurred my vision, but they were no longer only of sorrow. They were tears of release. My son shot to his feet, his face twisted with rage. "You cannot do this. She owes me. She is my mother." The judge's gaze cut him down with a single look. "This matter is settled. Sit down, Mr. Carter." But he did not sit. He pointed at me, his finger trembling with fury. "You'll regret this. You think you've won, but you've lost everything. You'll die alone, and no one will care." His wife tugged at his sleeve, whispering harshly, but he shook her off. His words stabbed at me, sharp and merciless, but for the first time, they did not pierce as deeply, because now I saw the truth. His anger was not born of love denied. It was born of greed thwarted. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, but my voice clear. "David, you already made sure I would die alone when you told me I was not wanted. Today, I chose to die with dignity instead of chains." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. My son's face flushed red, but he said nothing more. He turned sharply, storming out with his wife trailing behind him. The reporters surged as soon as I stepped outside, their questions flying like arrows. Ms. Howard shielded me as best she could, guiding me to the car. Inside, I finally let myself breathe. "You did it," she said softly. "No," I whispered, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. "We did it. You gave me my voice back." The drive home was quiet. When I stepped inside my house, the silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. I walked into the living room, where the photographs still lined the mantel. For the first time, I did not weep when I looked at them. I simply nodded, acknowledging the life I had lived, the love I had given, the mistakes and the triumphs. I sat at my desk, the will neatly filed away, and picked up my pen. I began writing a letter, not to my son, but to the organizations that would one day receive what I had worked so hard for. I told them my story, not in bitterness, but in hope. I wanted them to know that love, even when rejected, could still leave something good in the world. As I signed my name, I felt lighter. The chains of guilt, the years of silence, the rejection that had haunted me, they no longer defined me. The storm outside began to clear, a thin ribbon of sunlight breaking through the clouds. I opened the window and let the cool air wash over me. It smelled of rain, of renewal. I whispered to myself, "You are not unwanted, you are free." And in that moment, I believed it. Free. And in that moment, I believed it.